Hello everyone and welcome to PT 668. Today we will discuss professional development of physical therapists, education for a lifetime. Let's take a look at some of the objectives for today. So we're going to first explore how student PTs and PTs have chosen a career that fosters educational growth. We will review the educational history of PTs to kind of see how we got where we are. We'll examine the student PT's educational options. We'll differentiate between the variety of career management options PTs have after graduation, and we'll review state laws for continued competency. So let's get started. All right, so you're soon going to finish PT school, very soon. So what are your educational responsibilities once you've graduated? Well, quite a lot, as it turns out. And so let's explore some of those requirements as well as opportunities for education once you've become a PT. And let's also examine why these requirements are in place. I think it's good to have an understanding of why we have to continue with our education and become lifelong learners. So first, let's look at some history. All right, so we're going to go back a little bit and take a look at the APTA's Vision 2020 statement. You may be thinking, why are we looking at Vision 2020? That's yesterday's or yesteryear's news. Well, it is, but so much of what happened with this vision statement really influenced the course of physical therapy in recent decades. So it's worthwhile looking back to see what this vision statement was and how we got to where we are right now. So let's take a look. So physical therapy will be provided by physical therapists who are doctors of physical therapy. And in fact, we have met that goal in 2015, although it really took effect in 2016. All programs graduated DPT students, or graduated DPTs are no longer students. Physical therapists will also likely be board certified specialists, and certainly the majority of PTs are not board certified. However, the number is ever increasing, and we're going to take a closer look later on in this presentation as to, well, what is a board certified specialist and how does one become one, and actually why is it important for someone to become a board certified specialist. Also part of the statement, PTs will have direct access, and we've seen that in all 50 states. PTs have at least some level of direct access, and in California, as we discussed last year, we have a limited direct access, but we actually still have pretty good direct access. Patients can come see us without a referral from a physician. PTs are also autonomous. Also in all 50 states, physical therapists are autonomous professionals. Well, what does that mean? Well, when physical therapists first started out at the early part of last century, they generally worked under the supervision of a physician and weren't autonomous professionals. But over the years, we've gained our autonomy, and that means we can make our own clinical judgments and our own clinical decisions based upon what we see from our evaluations. So we're not relying on someone else to tell us what to do, and that's very important. And then also, part of the vision is that PTs will possibly be assisted by PTAs. And for those of you who, maybe have worked in a clinic or even your last clinical internship may have encountered many physical therapist assistants. The number of PTAs is increasing year over year. Although there are more physical therapists licensed than there are PTAs, there are now more PTA programs training PTAs than there are PT programs in the country. And so PTAs are becoming a larger and larger part of physical therapy practice. So that goal is also getting met as well. Some other components of the Vision 2020 statement include that PTs will be guided by lifelong learning. Hey, this is what we're talking about today. And it's very important that we continue to engage in lifelong learning. Your education doesn't just stop the day you graduate. It is perpetual, it's ever evolving and ever changing to meet the needs of the profession, of the patients, and anywhere you end up working. Physical therapists will also be guided by evidence-based practice and use of clinical research. Well, you've already been exposed to quite a lot of that in the program, and the goal is that you will continue to be keeping up to date with EBP and clinical research once you graduate. And that can be, attending conferences and classes, reading scientific journals, or maybe even getting involved in research yourself. So that's kind of where we were and where we've come to, and this is kind of how we've come to this point where we are, I guess, since I'm talking about that in a very roundabout way. Well, where are we now, I guess? We can look at the APTA's new vision statement, and this is transforming society by optimizing movement to improve the human experience. So there's been a real sea change, I think, in the way physical therapists now think. A lot of what we're doing is trying to enhance overall health in patients, not just waiting till they come in and need rehabilitation, but the focus is more on educating them, enhancing or optimizing movement, preventing injury and illness through exercise and movement. And this is really the big trend with physical therapy now. We have a mission statement, if you recall, from PT 648 when we talked about vision and mission statements with businesses. There's no difference here. The vision statement is more of an overarching statement. It's kind of vague. The mission statement's usually a little bit more detailed. And so the mission statement for the APTA now is to build a community that advances the profession of PT to improve the health of society. And that ties in with our vision statement. Well, how is that going to be met? Well, that's going to be met through a strategic plan. And I'm going to click on this and open this up here. And hopefully that works. There we go. All right. And we can take a look at the APTA strategic plan. It has 5 key components here. Sorry, 4 key components. 1, relevance, increasing member value and engagement. And this involves translating the latest research into tools and resources for practice, and creating a clear and consistent value propositions for key member segments. There's also stewardship, so fostering that long-term sustainability of the profession. And so this is championing student and early career issues, including debt burden, which is a big issue for many students, and I'm sure many of you, and career earning potential, which is also a big issue. I think the career earning potential has stagnated a little bit. And then also making APTA an inclusive organization that reflects the diversity of the society and the profession that it serves. Also enhancing quality, so elevating the quality of care provided, and accelerating adoption of the APTA's physical therapy outcome registry. So this builds a body of knowledge, and expand access to PT in primary care settings and employer health and wellness programs. And then finally, maximizing stakeholder awareness of the value of PT. So this includes advocating for payment policies that increase patient access to PT, embodying the APTA mission and vision through an integrated brand strategy, and leveraging the hashtag ChoosePT campaign and ChoosePT.com to inform the public about the benefits of physical therapy. And this is really important. Many members of the public, if they've not had physical therapy before, or they haven't had a family member go through physical therapy, they may not actually be fully aware of what it is that we can do. So really being an advocate for the profession and educating the public and even other caregivers, even other healthcare practitioners about what it is we can do and the value that we can offer is very, very important. So these are all part of the current strategic plan, and these actually tie in with a lot of your career professional development. Yes, we're going to be talking about a lot about lifelong learning and education, but it's not just that. It's also about your career professional development. All right, so let's close that out. All right, and we'll continue on with the presentation here. All right, so let's take a look. We're continuing with our theme of history right today, and we'll look at some of the educational requirements in the past. So physical therapy started around in the First World War. Primarily, you've probably got a little bit of history understanding that it really came about through the polio epidemic, but it became more of an accepted profession around the First World War, and its certification was awarded in the military. And then once the war ended, there was a certification awarded for civilians as well in 1918. It wasn't until 1928 that a standard 9-month certification was developed. Interestingly enough, the first bachelor's degree was even awarded before that at NYU in 1927. And after that fact, accreditation standards were developed. So I guess a case of maybe putting the horse or the cart before the horse, and that offering degrees even before offering accreditation standards, but that's played a little bit of catch up there. The bachelor's degree became standard in 1960. So before that, people earned a certification, and then after that, everyone had to get at least a bachelor's degree in order to become a physical therapist. Now, each state had, or not all states, but many states had competency exams, just as you're going to take when you graduate, but a competency exam wasn't standardized until 1954. Now we have the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy that administers the exam. It's the same exam across the country, the National Physical Therapy Exam, but everyone is licensed in the state where they live or work and practice. In 1960, the first master's degree in physical therapy was awarded, and this became standard in 2002. And then in 1996, Creighton University, I believe that's in Nebraska, awarded its first doctorate degree, and this became standard in 2016. I've sometimes mentioned 2015. That's when the rule was passed, but it didn't actually go into effect until 2016, and that's when all programs had to graduate DPTs. So why the change? Why have we gone from this certification to a bachelor's degree, to a master's degree, to a doctorate degree? Well, certainly in the early years, and I mentioned this before in terms of autonomy, the physical therapists did not have much autonomy in their profession. They operated under the supervision of a physician, but it wasn't until later when they started to gain autonomy, and that required more expanded knowledge and skills, that the bachelor's degree was awarded. Then there became more of an emphasis even on research and evidence-based practice, where the master's degree was awarded. And then finally the doctorate degree, and we'll take a look here. This some wording from the APTA. Why the DPT? So the adoption of the DPT recognized that the complexity of patient needs requires a greater understanding of how to treat an individual, one that comes with a doctorate level education. And so in January 2016, CAPTE made the DPT the required degree for all of its accredited entry-level physical therapist education programs. So this is the official statement. There's other factors that played a role in this. One of the other big components of switching to the DPT was to ensure direct access across all 50 states, and it's something that's been achieved. And then perhaps kind of maybe hidden a little bit in the weeds, maybe a little bit of competition even with other healthcare providers that we, I guess, kind of don't want to be left behind in terms of education, although I don't think anyone will publicly admit that. They may tacitly acknowledge that. But really it is about the greater complexity, and of course this comes with greater autonomy, and as I mentioned, greater autonomy has allowed us to have direct access, or allow patients to have direct access to us. So that's why we're here right now. All right, so before we talk about some educational options for you once you graduate, I do want to take a look at some pre-graduate educational options. Some of you have already taken advantage of these and maybe not really realizing it, but these enhance your education even beyond, the curriculum that you get in PT school. And we'll take a look at some of these things, and for some of you it may be a little bit too late to jump onto some of these things, but you can get involved once you graduate. So certainly there are volunteer opportunities for you as a student and even as a physical therapist. So I'm going to click on the link here. This should come up, hopefully. Oh, it's taking its time contacting the server. While we wait for that, I'll describe. So there are a number of volunteer activities that you can do as a student and even as a graduate. The APTA has a website, APTA Engage, which lists a number of various opportunities for you to get involved as a volunteer. And this is really something, it's part of giving back to the community. And I think it's important that at some point in your career you do engage in volunteerism. So I've just wanted to bring up the website so you know that it's there and you know where to go. There are other options even outside of physical therapy for volunteerism, but this is at least sponsored and supported by the APTA. So just a link to that if you're interested. Another pre-graduate educational option is your clinical internship, and certainly this is part of your curriculum. However, there's additional learning that can occur on the internship that may even fall outside of the required curriculum. So when you go through your clinical internship, you have to complete the clinical performance instrument, which assesses you on a number of skills and knowledge and behaviors. However, learning doesn't stop just with the CPI. Use your clinical internships to your advantage, particularly if you're in an area or you're at a site where, oh, this is an area where I might want to continue with work once I graduate. Other opportunities that you can take advantage of that perhaps you're not even going to be evaluated on. And I'll give you some examples. When I was a student, I actually did one of my clinical internships at the University of Utah Sports Medicine Center. I didn't go to University of Utah, but I happened to get an internship at their Sports Medicine Center. And this was great because we were closely linked with a number of orthopedic surgeons who shared the same building. They were just down the hall from us, and so I got to visit with some of the orthopedic surgeons as they did their rounds. I also got to observe a number of surgeries. I also had the chance there to go and participate, observe and work with athletic trainers there, occupational therapists, and so on. I did a neurological rehab internship in Portland, Oregon, and this was a big research site as well, and I actually got to be a research participant in a vestibular study, so that was quite interesting. So take advantage. There's lots of opportunities that can come up during your internships that, again, fall outside of the general scope of what it is you're evaluated on, but take advantage of those when they come up, because you may not get the chance so much once you're busy working. You also can continue with education through concurrent employment or volunteer. So I know many of you have been aides. Every now and again, we get someone who's a PTA who goes through the program. Maybe you work in a chiropractor office or as an athletic trainer. So these are great options for you to enhance your learning, although probably a little late to start up that now if you haven't done it already. You may be interested, even though it's your last year, getting involved in the student assembly and politics. If you're interested in that, I encourage you to go to the California Physical Therapy Association website. They have a lot of information about the student assembly, as well as there's a student conclave conference, and I'll talk about that later in this presentation. And if you haven't participated, that may be something you'd enjoy doing. And then really, I think one of the most important things you can do even in your last year of the program is try to find a mentor. Now, oftentimes a mentor is going to be someone who you work with, but it doesn't always have to be that case. Many times there isn't a viable mentor where you work, but it could be someone that you met in a clinical internship. It could be a former employer, someone who has a lot of experience. It doesn't always have to even be a physical therapist, but ideally in the first years of your career, it's ideal to have a physical therapist as your mentor. So what's the value of having a mentor? A mentor is a person who's going to be able to answer questions for you as you start your career, help guide you on certain career and educational paths, maybe look out for you, provide you with other opportunities, introduce you to people who might help advance your career, and so on. I've had a number of mentors in my career, and actually most recently, when I finished my doctorate, I have a friend who actually has 2 PhDs for some reason, which is really kind of strange. I don't know anyone else who's done that, but he was an invaluable resource for me when I was writing my dissertation. It was very stressful. It was a lot of time, a lot of work. Sometimes your doctoral supervisor doesn't give you all of the information you'd like, or you get conflicting information from the various supervisors. So it was nice to have a mentor who I could bounce ideas off, someone who'd already been there, and in this case, someone who'd already been there twice. So really that's what you want a mentor for, someone who's been there and can answer some questions. So already start thinking about that in your last year. Maybe on your clinical internship, you might find someone, it doesn't even have to be your clinical instructor. It could just be someone who works there that you get along with, and ask, hey, you don't have to have a formal agreement, but ask if, hey, do you mind if on occasion I email you or call you if I have some questions? And I think a lot of people like doing that. They like helping out the new crop of graduates that come through and that are starting the profession. So I really strongly encourage you to think about that now. Don't wait till you start your first job. All right, now we're going to look at postgraduate educational options. So there are a number of options for education. Oftentimes we think about just taking Con Ed courses, which we're going to talk about, but there are a number of other options that extend even beyond that. So we'll take a look at more of the formal education first. So there are a number of post-professional doctoral and graduate programs. I know PTs who've sometimes gone on to get a master's or even a doctor's of public health or an MBA. This would be appropriate for someone who perhaps wants to get into management or is already in management and would actually like a little bit more of that background knowledge to help them with that job. And so if you do find yourself getting up into higher level management, having one of these degrees may be very valuable for you. Another type of degrees some PTs get are the post-professional PhDs or DSCs, or even like I got the EDD, the Doctorate of Education. So these are what are considered academic doctorates. These are really only appropriate for those who want to get into academia, become a faculty member, or get into research. Now, there's nothing wrong with someone getting a PhD who's going to continue with clinical work, but it doesn't really make sense from a career standpoint. You don't really need the PhD unless you're wanting to get into research. However, some of you may find that over time you have an interest in getting into academia. There's a good chance that some of you may end up teaching. And to teach in a DPT program, it's beneficial to have an academic doctorate. So either the PhD, the DSC, or even an EDD. And the reason why is CAPTE, our accrediting body, requires that at least 50% of the faculty in any DPT program has an academic doctorate. And so you certainly could get a job in an academic department with a DPT and oftentimes with a clinical specialty. But you have a much better leg up if you already have the academic doctorate where you've actually conducted some research as well, because that's a big part of what faculty have to do in DPT programs. So something to consider. If it's something that you're interested in, certainly you can talk to me or any of the faculty who've gone through that. And then finally, this doesn't really apply to you, but you may run into people who have the post-professional DPT, or what are sometimes called the transitional DPTs. And these are people who graduated from PT school before the DPT was offered. So they have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, but they wanted to get the doctorate because that seems to be the trend. So there's a number of transitional doctorates. So you may run into people with that. And again, that doesn't apply to you, but at least so you know what it is. All right, some other types of education you can engage in is undergoing a clinical residency. So a clinical residency is when you want to specialize in a specific area of practice, and you actually go through clinical and didactic education. Basically what happens, you end up working at a clinic almost as if you were a student, but you are getting paid. But you go through, you're working at that clinic, you're treating patients, and you have a clinical supervisor and a mentor who guides you through. Typically, this prepares the resident to become a board-certified clinical specialist, and we'll talk about that soon. It requires at least 1,500 contact hours to complete the clinical residency. No fewer than 9 months and no more than 36 months or 3 years. So where can I do a clinical residency? You may be asking, in what areas? Well, let's take a look at the website and see what some of the options are. So this is, wait till it comes up here. Yeah, so this is the American Board of Physical Therapy Residency and Fellowship Education, or ABET. I don't think you're supposed to pronounce the acronym like that. So this gives you an overview of what residencies and fellowships are, and we'll talk about fellowships on the next slide. And we'll take a look at a directory of programs. So we can click on here. Again, it takes a little second to load up. There we go. And it lists in alphabetical order, at least by content area. We've got acute care. I'm going to just scroll down a little bit. We have cardiovascular and pulmonary. Then it lists all of those ones. We've got clinical electrophysiology. There's only one here. So we can go down. There's geriatrics and so on. So we can go through, and let's actually, I'm going to scroll up again here. Sorry to move so fast. But I know there's an acute care one just at UCSF, acute care residency. It's right near the top. So let's click on that. And so this brings us to their page, and they actually have, if we look in the left side column here, they have acute care residency. They have the admissions requirements, the application process, including the coursework and the schedule. And this describes a little bit about what the residency is. If we go to the overview, it'll actually show that UCSF also offers residencies in orthopedics as well. So we could click on that and find out about the orthopedic one. And again, includes the coursework and the schedule. If you can click on that, for example, I can tell you how many hours a week, how much mentoring, and so on. So this gives you all of the information you need, and there's even some admissions requirements here as well, and so you can look through all of that. So I'm not going to go through all of the details, and this is just one example, but you go on to that. I included the link there. Go on to that residency page if that's something you're interested in. I think it's a great way for new graduates to develop their skills in an organized and structured manner, and you also become an expert specialist in a certain area of practice. I worked at a clinic that offered a residency. It was part of the Ola Grimsby Institute. This was an orthopedic manual therapeutic exercise type of residency, and we had at any given time probably 2 to 3 residents at my clinic. We actually had some satellite clinics, and there'd be 1 or 2 at some of those other ones. They actually worked full time. They got paid a reduced salary because they were also paying for the residency. They treated patients. They had one-on-one supervision with a residency supervisor. Every Wednesday we would do roundtables where we would sit there and discuss complex patients. We'd have more organized continuing education type classes 1 weekend a month. So it was really a great program for these residents. And once they finished the residency, pretty much all of them ended up working for us because we were a great place to work. But it was a great opportunity. And as opposed to taking kind of this smattering of courses here and there, and it's kind of very easy to do, and that's what I did when I graduated, this kind of scattershot approach. I'll take this class or that class, and there wasn't much organization and structure to it. It took me a few years to realize I needed that. This really gives the physical therapist that organization and structure. Now, early on in one's career, you may want to take a few different courses because you're not sure the areas where you might want to specialize, if you want to specialize at all. But I think once you get a sense that you'd like to specialize, I do strongly encourage you to do a residency program. Granted, it's not free. There is a cost to it, and that's something you have to weigh out as well. But as I mentioned, the one where I was at, and I'm happy to answer any questions specifically about that one, we took on, they were employees, but they were also residents as well. So it actually kind of worked out quite well. So once you've completed a residency and you're really good, and then you want to become really, really good or really, really specialized, you can do a clinical fellowship. So this is for those who want to demonstrate expertise, and they usually have to have advanced clinical and didactic skills, and so they have that advanced clinical and didactic instruction. It's more intense mentorship. It's not quite as long, a minimum of 1,000 hours, no fewer than 6 months, and no more than 36 months. So the same website that I included that link to on the previous slide also has information about fellowship. So many of the residency programs will also offer a fellowship. Not all of them, but many of them will. So if you finish the residency, then you can go on and do the fellowship, and that's when you become a true expert in that specialty area. So if you have any questions, ask me. And actually, Dr. Green would be a great one to speak with as well. If I recall, she ran the orthopedic residency program at UCSF that we just looked at. So she could probably give you some insight into that. All right. Okay. So some other options for professional development and education once you've graduated are leadership development, or is leadership development. And there's a number of ways you can get involved with being a leader. Some of you may want to take that course in your career, take that path. Many of you are just want to stick with clinical work and aren't interested in becoming a leader. Some of you really want to get involved in policy and practice and politics and so on. And there's a number of options for you. The APTA website has a number of links to that as well. But you can get involved, for example, if you own a clinic or work for a private practice clinic, there's a private practice section, and they have several meetings and special interest groups at the combined section meeting. It's a great way to develop leadership skills, as well as the education section. That typically applies to those who are in academia. There's health policy and administration section, and this is geared toward new professionals. So if leadership is of interest to you, I encourage you to join that section. There's also the APTA component governance and leadership, so you can get involved in each chapter or each section. So for example, getting involved in the California chapter, there's lots of opportunity to get involved. They're always looking for new recruits. And so if it's something that you're interested in, join your local chapter and get involved in becoming a leader. It's also a great way to network. People will open doors for you. You can really enhance your career by getting involved at some of these levels, at section level or chapter levels. And then even the APTA Learning Center has coursework on leadership and professionalism. In fact, we'll talk a little bit more later about some of the courses that you can take, and some of them are offered by the APTA Learning Center. We'll take a quick look at the link here because I've included it. So if you're not familiar with this, the APTA Learning Center has a whole bunch of online courses that you can take. Many of them are free actually with your membership, but some of them you do have to pay for. And I'm not going to go through everything, but there's a link to a catalog. You can see what your training is. You get a transcript of all your records and so on. So I would, take some time, visit this webpage and scroll around and see what you can find. There's a lot of various, I'm often checking out these Centennial Lecture Series. They're great. There's a lot of other educational opportunities, and some of them are related to leadership if that's of interest to you. All right. And some of you may also be interested in becoming board certified. I talked about this before. This was part of the Vision 2020, that many of the PTs will become board certified. Well, what does that mean? Well, board certification is a specialty certification for those individuals who've demonstrated advanced clinical knowledge and skills in a specialty area. And we can take a look at their website as well. So lots of clicks away today here. And this is run by the American Board of Physical Therapy Specialists. There are a number of areas we can get certification, and basically you actually sit for a pretty rigorous exam, and you can actually, then you have the certification after your name, but of course you also develop a great amount of knowledge and skill. So if we go to their website, you want to click on Become a Specialist, and it tells you who they are, but it also tells you, let's see, some of the specialty areas. Yeah, so we get specialty areas in cardiovascular and pulmonary, clinical electrophysiology, geriatrics, neurology. This was one of the more popular ones. Oncology, orthopedics. I think this is the most popular one. Pediatrics, sports, women's health, and then wound management. So let's just, for example, take a look at the neurology one. So let's say you're working in a neurologic rehab setting and you want to become a board certified specialist. So this tells you a little bit about what's needed. And so this board certification has been around for nearly 40 years. And we can take a look at some of the application requirements. Now, the bad news is as new graduates, you will not be eligible to become board certified because you have to meet either option A or B. So you have to complete at least 2,000 hours of direct patient care in the specialty area within the last 10 years, and 25% of those have to have been within the last 3 years. Or the other option is that you've gone through the completion of an APTA accredited post-professional clinical residency, which we just talked about. So that's not something you can do as a new graduate. However, this is something you should look at as a new graduate if it interests you. So most of the requirements for each of the specialties are similar, but there are some differences. You just want to make sure you check out all the requirements. And it has some additional requirements by specialty here. So take a look at this if it's something you're interested in, and though it's still going to be early in your career, start planning ahead, making sure you're getting those contact hours, or maybe you decide you want to do a residency early on. As I said, if you can afford to do that and it works with your schedule, I would encourage you to do a residency, although it's not required. That is one way, though, to meet one of the requirements, the application requirements for the board certification. And then when you get the board certification, you get to put the letters behind your name, which is kind of nice. And so we can see all of the certification areas here. All right. Other ways to enhance your education and knowledge are through conferences. I believe most, if not all of you, have attended at least one conference during your time in PT school. My favorite conference, and I think probably most people's favorite conference, is the Combined Section Meeting, which is held every February. This is the one where you get everyone in the country descending on a particular area. It's always nice when it's in a warm city. They used to always have them in warm cities. They've started moving to some colder cities recently. But it's a great opportunity to network, to find out who's hiring, to get goodie bags of all sorts of treats and cool little implements and things like that. But for education purposes, it's a wonderful place to expose yourself to lots of continuing education. There's pre-conference courses, which usually last a day or two, but during the conference you'll have these 1 to 2 hour courses, and you can kind of hop around from class to class to class, and you can learn a whole bunch. There's a number of speakers you can see. There's special interest group meetings that meet at the CSM. So really great opportunity to expose yourself to a variety of education, and you also earn CEUs, or continuing education units, which are required for your licensure, and we'll talk about those in a short while. The CPTA conference, smaller but a great conference, and that's every October. There's the National Student Conclave. I'm not sure if any of you have gone, but this is also a great opportunity to find out what's going on in the world of student PTs. And then there are often smaller conferences for specific sections or special interest groups. And so I do encourage you, if you haven't been to a conference, to avail yourself of them. They can be quite expensive to go to, so this is something that perhaps you can maybe negotiate with your employer. Will they cover part or even all of the costs of the conferences? I've worked at places where they'll allow someone to attend a conference every 3 or 4 years, because it does cost a lot of money. It's not just the conference fees, but it's the airfare and the hotel and so on. So something that could be part of your negotiation when you apply for a job, to have some money set aside for conferences. And then continuing education courses, and this is typically what most of us think about as our Con Ed post-graduation. And it's true, most of us don't go through residency programs or even go get a board certification. And many PTs actually can't afford to even attend all the conferences, but this is the way that PTs can keep up to date with current knowledge, current findings in the field, and so on. So Con Ed courses, as I mentioned, do occur at the national conferences. You can also go to the APTA Learning Center. There's a number of online courses you can take. The CPTA also has a whole continuing education series, so you can take courses through them. And if you're a chapter member, then you're going to be getting emails from them anyway, so you'll be constantly bombarded. You'll also start getting flyers in the mail about various courses. But probably most common are people taking private Con Ed courses. Either they're short day or weekend courses, or sometimes long-term courses that span multiple weekends or weeks. And these will be in any topical area. As I said, you're going to get bombarded with flyers. I think the Physical Therapy Board sells your address to these providers. I'm not sure how they get your address, but I know they got my address, and which is fine. I don't mind getting the flyers to tell you about various courses. I will say, in recent years, the number of flyers have decreased because everything is much more online. But someone will find my email, and now I'll get an advertisement via email. But at least they're not wasting the paper. Although it's not always a waste. Sometimes they're great courses, but you're going to be bombarded with a number of courses that you can possibly take. There's a number of websites as well that you can go on that offer physical therapy Con Ed courses. Even just doing a basic Google search will allow you to find any number of providers. What you need to do is, be really astute and aware about what it is they're offering. Is this a qualified course? Do the CEUs count in California? That's very, very important. Don't take a course if the CEUs don't count toward your licensure, unless you just want to take the course, but it would be a shame to take that and not get any credit for that. But also really pay attention to how the course is delivered. Courses now are much more shifting toward online as opposed to in person. When I was first graduated, there were no online courses. Everything was done in person. Now everything is online, and there's different levels of quality to the online courses. I've taken some very good ones that are interactive with videos and Q&A as you go along, and they really make you think. And I've taken ones where they gave me a PDF copy of a chapter of a textbook that I already owned, and they just asked a bunch of questions at the end that I had to pass the test to get the credit for. And so that, yeah, I guess it was a good review, but it felt kind of a little bit of a waste of my time. So I do encourage you to really find out more about the course that you're going to take and how is it going to be delivered. Additionally, even though there's a tendency to want to take online courses because they're convenient, I really encourage you to take in-person courses as much as you can, particularly early in your career. And the reason why, there's a number of reasons why. The first reason why is in-person courses allow you to develop hands-on skills, and you have an instructor there who's going to give you feedback. You're practicing on another PT, a peer or a colleague of yours. They can give you feedback as well. You don't get a chance to practice like that. You can't do that on your patients. So it's really good when you're learning hands-on skills to take an in-person course. The other reason, which I've gone on and on about before, is that it's a great networking opportunity. I've met so many people at courses that I've kept in touch with. You never know where your next job might come along, or even just making good friends at some of the courses as well. You're all PTs. It's great. You meet these people from around the state or even from around the country all coming together for a course. So it's fine. Certain content may be more conducive to online learning, but I do think when you're doing real patient care type activities, I strongly encourage you to find some in-person courses. And they're kind of a nice fun break and a getaway from the day-to-day grind of work. All right, so when you're looking at courses, we're on continuing education courses continued. That seems a bit redundant. But we also want to look at the level that the course is offered at. So they're typically categorized as basic, intermediate, or advanced. And so the basic assumes that the participants have little information within the areas to be covered. So this may be a topical area. You've had little experience. Maybe it wasn't covered in PT school, or you did get it covered, but you never really saw those types of patients when you did your clinical internships. So a basic course may be more appropriate for you. An intermediate level assumes that you do have some familiarity, and it may be that, all right, you haven't seen a lot of patients with this type of disorder, or you haven't done a lot of this sort of treatment, but maybe you did have a chance to practice those during one of your internships. Or even after a year or two of work under your belt, you've developed some skills. And then advanced assumes that you have great familiarity and more expert skills. And I would discourage new graduates from taking advanced courses. There is utility to taking sort of basic or intermediate courses to build up those level of skills. So when you're looking at a course and you're determining whether it's one you'd like to take, see if it does indicate the level of skill that's required for that course, and choose judiciously. All right, so we've talked pretty much about all the number of ways that you can get continuing education once you have graduated. Let's take a look at the requirements for continuing competency. And actually, competency is a little bit different than education, and we'll see why the Physical Therapy Board of California doesn't require that your competency is met just with education. There are a number of other ways that you can meet the competency standards. Most people do take Con Ed courses, but as I mentioned, there are other ways. But let's take a look at the requirements. We've talked about these earlier in the semester with the student presentations, but I think it's worth revisiting them again because it's something that's going to come up for you every 2 years. So if you recall, when you graduate and you get your first license renewal is going to be in the end of the birth month, the end of your birth month. And that could be anywhere from 13 months to 24 months, that span of time. So some of you may be unlucky and you have a shorter first license cycle. It just depends on when you were born. But in that first renewal, you're going to need to do 3 things. You're going to need 4 hours of basic life support. So this should be the American Heart Association basic life support for healthcare providers. And the key is that it is for healthcare providers. You don't want to take it for, John Q. Public here. You want the one for healthcare providers. That's what's required. You'll also need 2 hours of ethics laws and regulations. So many providers, and these are typically ones that I do this, I take them online. A lot of providers will have your 2-hour ethics course and it'll say approved for California, and you can take a course like that. You can also, as we'll see later, you can sit for the California laws and regulations exam. Again, you can keep taking that and that will meet that requirement. I have not utilized that option, but it is an option that is available. And then you'll need 9 hours of other coursework. And so some of the things that we talked about, and these are typically the Con Ed courses you can take, although we'll see in the next slide there are some alternate pathways for meeting that requirement. And then for all subsequent license renewals, which then it's a 2-year cycle, your license expires at the end of your birth month, you'll still need your 4 hours of basic life support, again, for healthcare providers, your 2 hours of ethics laws and regulations, but now you'll need 24 hours of other coursework over that 2 years. Now, what's important to note is you do not have to submit anything. When you renew your application through Breeze, through the website, I believe it will ask you to check a box to state that you have met those requirements. You do not have to submit documentation that you've met continued competency. It is only if you are audited, and from my understanding, it is a random audit that you may just be audited, and then you do need to make sure you've held on to any of those documents to show that you have met the continued competency requirement. What's important to note, and I believe Jason Kaiser has shared this, that they're not going to look back years and years and years. They're just going to look back in the last cycle and that last 2 years. So do make sure, though, you hold on to any certificates that you have for any coursework that you've done for each license renewal cycle. You don't have to submit it unless you're asked. And then they'll give you instructions on how to do that. All right. Now, as I mentioned, there are other ways to meet the continued competency that aren't just based on taking a Con Ed course. And so here's a few examples. Now, this is actually buried kind of deep in the Physical Therapy Board of California website. So I've pulled this out for you, and I'll have a copy of this on Canvas as well so you can reference it easily. But another way to get hours is publishing a peer-reviewed journal article, case study, or book chapter. So 5 hours per article, study, or chapter for a maximum amount of 16 hours. Or you can develop or present an approved college or Con Ed course for the first time. So you can't keep teaching the same course again and again. You get 4 hours per course, up to 16 hours. You can participate as a subject matter expert in the examination process for the PT Board, the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy, or the ABPTS. So this is the board specialty that we talked about. And again, 6 hours per experience, up to 16 hours. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just wanted to go through some of those. But I will say you can look at L here at the very bottom, successfully passing the board's California law exam. You get your 2 hours, and that actually counts for your 2 hours of your ethics and law requirements. So you can meet it that way as well. As I said, I haven't done that. I think taking that exam once was enough for me, but it may be something that you wish to do. So take a look at these, and you may find that you can meet continued competency through ways other than just taking Con Ed courses, although oftentimes the Con Ed courses are the most common way to do that. All right. I want to talk a little bit about mentoring. I talked about a little bit earlier as part of a way to enhance your education while you're still in school. And I did mention that it's good to consider finding a mentor even in your last year of PT school. And as I said, the mentor doesn't have to be a PT, and you don't even have to mentor a PT if you become a mentor down the road, but it is useful. I also encourage you, once you graduate, you can find a clinical mentor. So this was someone who's going to be mentoring you while you're in the clinic. Ideally, this is someone you work with because then you can bounce ideas off them. When I was a new graduate, I had a mentor in theory, so I did have a seasoned clinician who was assigned as my mentor to help me through the first year of practice. The reality was she was just so darn busy, as was I, that we had very little time to meet, and she had very little time to answer many of my questions. Fortunately, I was able to find a mentor. This had actually been someone from my last clinical internship, not my CI, but another PT who I became friendly with. And she was just a great resource for me in terms of, just answering career questions and things like that. So that's what you need to find. And then academic mentoring. So this is something that, yes, even outside of school, I think once you become a graduate, I do encourage you to become a clinical instructor, and by that you become an academic mentor. I probably should have highlighted on the previous slide, one of the ways that you can earn continued competency is by becoming a clinical instructor. If you're a CI for a student on a full-time clinical internship that's at least 4 weeks, you can earn CEUs. Now you need to have gone through the clinical instructor credentialing program, and if you're interested in that, Brian Coleman Salgado has a lot of information about that. He actually helps manage and organize some of those courses. But become a credentialed CI, then become a CI. One, you can earn CEUs, but also then you become an academic mentor. And so think about the value that you've had with some of your clinical instructors and how important that is. So I do encourage you, once you finish PT school, get a year or two under your belt. You usually have to have that anyway before you can become a CI. And then think about taking a student. It is really wonderful for the student. It's so helpful for their career development, as you've probably found. But it's also really helpful for you. You really have to be on top of your game when you are a clinical instructor. You're going to be hit with all sorts of questions. You really have to be able to justify everything you're doing, and it makes you a much better clinician overall. I've included a link. I'm not going to go in here, but you can pull that up. It's just a brief page, a PDF file of some best practices for mentorship in physical therapy. But I encourage you in one way, shape, or form, whether formally or informally, to become a mentor once you get a few years of experience under your belt. But I strongly encourage you this year to seek out a mentor. So it could be a former employer, it could be a clinical instructor that you have, it could be someone else who works in that facility like I had, it could be someone you work with. But it's really important to have someone, because you're kind of adrift at sea in that first year. I certainly felt that way. Didn't have a lot of people I could communicate with, as I did have this one friend, but I think I would have liked a little bit more. So learn from my experience. Find yourself a mentor. And finally, I think we're finishing up here. Some other options for just enhancing your lifelong learning is to work outside of the US. This is a great way to enrich your career and enhance your life experiences. I was in Vietnam in 2014, and I met a young lady there from New Zealand who was a student physical therapist, and she was just finishing up a clinical internship in physical therapy at a pediatric hospital in Hanoi, Vietnam. And it's so transpired that her program, and I'm not sure if this is consistent through all of New Zealand, but certainly her program required all of the students to complete at least one international internship, which I thought was just a wonderful idea. Certainly logistically, it can be a big problem, but I would love to see that happen in the US as well. And so this is what she did. And so she chose to go to a pediatric hospital in Vietnam, and it sounds like she had a wonderful experience. And I assume now she's a PT. That was several years ago, or a physio, I think, as they call them in New Zealand. So, of course, if you do choose to work outside the U.S., you'll need to check on citizenship and residency requirements. You don't necessarily need to be a citizen, but you need to check about residency requirements, credentialing and licensure. Most countries have some requirements in terms of credentialing. You may have to bring transcripts. It's not a slam dunk that, oh, I graduated from a US PT program that I can just go get a license in any country. It's not quite so easy. And we've already looked at some of the challenges of foreign graduates coming to the US. When we looked at the laws and regulations, it can be quite difficult. You also want to really pay attention to what are the language requirements for the country. We assume English is the lingua franca throughout the world, and it is. Many people do speak English more than any other language internationally, but it may be where you choose to go, English isn't widely spoken, or if you're going to be working with patients who don't speak English, this can be problematic. So you may have these grand ideas to go to a country and treat patients there, but in practicality it may not work if you don't speak the language. Some other options that allow you to go overseas as well are in the U.S. military, through USA Jobs, or through the U.S. State Department, where you might work at an embassy. From experience, I can speak. I know a number of people who've worked for the U.S. military. In fact, a few who've actually gone on after PT school to get military jobs, and this was actually great for them because much of their debt was forgiven, or the debt was paid for by the U.S. military. So they may have not made as big a salary as they could have gotten working in the private sector, but as I mentioned, their debt was forgiven, and that was a real advantage for them. Additionally, there's often great benefits. And as I mentioned, there's sometimes the opportunity to travel either within the U.S. or opportunity to go to bases outside of the U.S. And what's interesting about those who work in the military, physical therapists, they often have a lot more autonomy than private sector PTs. For example, many of them are allowed to authorize certain evaluative tests like MRIs and X-rays and things, so on, or diagnostic tests, sorry. So they're allowed to authorize those. Also, what's interesting, if you enter the military with a doctorate degree, you're going to start out as an officer. I believe it's a lieutenant, I'm not sure, but that's a pretty high rank, and you can move up quite high. I do know a PT who's actually a colonel in the military, in the Army, starting out as a PT there. So there are great opportunities just in the military alone, but also if you do wish to work overseas. You can also get involved with the World Confederation of Physical Therapy, and they actually do an annual World Conference of PT in a different country every year. So even if not working clinically, you can get involved with that and maybe do some work with the conference. And there's also the option of health volunteers overseas. So this is an organization not specific to PTs, but specific to healthcare providers overall that train educators in other countries in that specialty area. So for example, Health Volunteers Overseas has a number of projects. They've got in Vietnam, they have in Rwanda, they have in India, I believe they have Guatemala, a number of countries around the world where the PTs go train the faculty at those institutions, at those universities, in more modern techniques, so that they can then train more physical therapists to work in their healthcare system. You will find, if you do travel overseas, you'll find that many PTs don't have the same level of autonomy that we do in the US. And oftentimes the education is lacking. So this is a great organization that's trying to elevate the standard of education for physical therapists worldwide, which ultimately is best for the patients, but also gives the physical therapists greater autonomy. All right, so we're done. So education is a lifelong choice. This is our summary here, and I do want to emphasize this. Your Con Ed just doesn't happen. You have to make a choice. I do know PTs who wait until 2 weeks before their license renewal is due, and they go online and find as many courses that they can take quickly so that they just meet that license requirement. That's not how you should continue your education. I don't think it needs to be said, but it is a lifelong choice. It's something that you have to be proactive. You should set an agenda for yourself, and this is why I have you do this professional development assignment where you're identifying topical areas that you're interested in, and those may change, and that's great, that's fine, but right now set that agenda so that you then have a clear path for education in those first few years once you graduate. I didn't do that. I wish I had. I think it would have gotten my first few years off to a better start. So but continue with that for the rest of your career. So in addition to variety and wide spectrum of jobs and specialties, there's a lot of choices for you to continue your education after graduation. So we've seen some of them, and who knows, further options may appear in the future. But certainly if you have any questions about some of the educational choices I've made post-graduation, certainly feel free to ask me. I'm happy to share my experiences, what worked and what didn't work. And then of course, each pathway is unique, and our careers will be enriched if we make the habitual effort necessary to stay on our educational paths. I've included links, and I've had links, of course, throughout the presentation as well. And then, of course, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask me, but certainly it's helpful to save them for when we all get together as a class, because the rest of the class might want to hear them. So certainly jot down your questions as you go along, and I imagine you'll have many. Thank you for listening and watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you all in class. Bye.